Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. Okay, so I know I've touched on this topic in the past, but the discourse around it has popped up again, this time in relation to Resident Evil Village. There are a lot of people out there that seem to think that at between 8 and 12 hours for most people, Resident Evil Village is too short. It doesn't offer value for money. I think that's nonsense, and more to the point, I think it's yet another example of people looking at a work of art and instead seeing a product for consumption. As I have said plenty of times in the past, and will no doubt say again in the future, this really hurts games. I want to focus my argument today this way. When people pay $100 for tickets to a music concert, ballet, opera, or theatre performance, they are not paying for the 2 to 3 hours that the performance will run in itself. They're also paying for an experience that will stay with them for a long time afterwards. They saw their favourite band play. They saw a legendary actor play Romeo or Juliet on stage just meters away from them. They think about that performance. It comes up in conversation with family and friends. They reference back to it when talking about other things. For example, when I was recently playing Fata Morgana, the characters were nattering on about Romeo and Juliet, and I was immediately reminded of the theatre performance I had seen of that play, which then got me thinking along those lines, the parallels and contrasts between that play and the game, and so on and so forth. Playing the game reminded me of a theatre performance that I had seen years and years ago. The point here is that with good art, the runtime of the art itself is not relevant. The experience lasts for much longer than that. I can give you an even more extreme example. Consider paintings and sculpture. It takes 1 second to take in the raw information that a painting provides, to complete it in the same way that you might complete a video game, to consume its content. It takes 1 second to do that. Actually understanding a great work of art takes a lifetime. I went to a gallery in Japan a couple of years ago which was holding a special old and new style exhibition. In one room was the most famous of Monet's Water Lilies paintings. I actually went to see that because I'd never actually seen it live. I'm a big fan of that painting, but I'd never actually seen it in a gallery. It represented the old. In the same room, they had a modern artist reinterpret that painting, which took the form of a pool of water that was filled with gently floating bowls that would chime when they tapped into one another. Now that entire exhibit could have been seen and understood in the sense of consuming the content in the length of time that it took to walk across the room, a couple of seconds at most. I sat in that room for over an hour musing over the juxtaposition of the two artworks. I purchased the gallery guide from the store and I've referenced back to it from time to time, and I have been remembering that exhibition for years now. In fact, I'm bringing it up here. Years after I saw it, I'm still talking about it. I would argue that what matters to the value of any artistic work is the experience that it provides, not the boundaries of the art itself, but what it does before, during, and after the boundaries of that content. Resident Evil Village is a case in point. It is more than the 11 hours it took me to finish. It's those 11 hours plus the brush up I did of Gothic literature in preparing my coverage. It's the 11 hours plus the hours I talked with game critics about it in the lead up to release. It's the 11 hours plus the runtime of Francis Ford Coppola's film adaptation of Dracula, which I watched to compare how he depicted the vampires to the way that RE Village does. That's dozens of hours of experience that I have taken out of Village, and if that strikes you as poor value, then I don't know what to say to you. Your expectations are far too high, or you're simply not playing video games with enough thought as you're playing them. Now, I realize that it is much easier to quantify value when you can place a clock in the game and have it tell you exactly how many hours of fun you've just had. But that is not how art works. What made Shakespeare great wasn't that all his plays lasted for 3 hours. It's because his plays were plays that people could not shut up about, and centuries later, there are still people that dedicate their entire careers to performing, analysing, teaching, and writing about those plays. What made Citizen Kane great wasn't that it was a 1 hour 59-minute film, which actually for that time was fairly lengthy. It wasn't because it was a 2-hour film though. It was because the film redefined how films were made. It innovated in cinematography and performance, and it influenced entire generations of filmmakers. What makes a video game great has nothing to do with how long it is, whatsoever. What makes a video game great is what it is telling you and how it is telling you that. And following on from that, let's then talk about value. Now, to me, value comes from spending money on something that I love. I spent $1,000 on a Hatsune Miku doll, and much like a great work of art, and as a side note, that Miku doll really is very beautiful, but I had consumed all the content of that doll 1 second after I opened the box. That doll's value is that for years now I have been enjoying looking at her in the cabinet that I've got set up for all my Miku treasures. So when I say that I don't care that a video game is 10 minutes long or 100 hours, and I do say that from time to time, and for some reason sometimes it gets pushback, but I say it because I tie value to quality. A 10-minute game that tells me something really profound is much more valuable than 10,000 hours of shallow content, in much the same way that a poem that's 15 lines long has so much more value, or if it's a good poem anyway, a good poem that's 15 lines long has so much more value than 12 dozen youth fiction novels. And indeed, the value of Resident Evil Village, since we're talking about that, would have plunged if it was any longer. As it was, I felt like the game sat on the cusp of being bloated. Horror doesn't work over long periods, because the longer you spend playing a horror game, watching a horror film, reading a horror book, the longer you spend immersed in the horror, the more desensitized you become to it. It's a case of diminishing returns with that genre. If you were to double the length of RE Village, then you would cut its value in half, because it loses its ability to impact on you. And so this brings me to the thing, really. Every time somebody says to me, this game should be X hours long before I'll pay for it, or I'll wait for a sale unless it's Y hours long, I ask them what they would add to the game. They can never answer me, not least because they haven't actually played it, so they don't know what's in it. But if you were to ask the same question to the people who have played something like Resident Evil Village and still think it's too short, you're inevitably going to get tumbleweeds from them. They don't know what they would add to it. They just want more content. They don't know what they'd add to it because there's nothing you could add to Village to strengthen it. It is a complete work of art, and we should value it like that. Now, all of this has been said with the disclaimer that I do think games should be accessible. In fact, all art should be accessible to absolutely everybody that wants to experience it. And because too much art is too expensive, thanks to capitalisms, too many people miss out on things that they'd love because they lack the resources to engage with the art form. I know a lot of people that only got into ballet much later on in life because they just couldn't afford tickets to go when they were younger, and the difference between having a lifelong love of something and having something that you discover later on in life is huge. So I do think that arts in general should be pushing to become cheaper. That's a different topic and a different discussion for another day. The argument that I'm making here is that to tie the value of a game to its length is utter nonsense, and it needs to stop, because it is hurting how we see games. It is hurting how games are made. So many developers are making these stupidly bloated games to hit an arbitrary length because they know that otherwise the consumer is not going to see that game as being valuable. And it's just a very unartistic way of looking at an art form. Instead, I would say that we should tie game value to the experience instead. You pay $100 for a game that lasts you 20 hours, and then you toss it on the shelf never to think about it again. That game has no value. A game that spends 5 hours, 10 hours, whatever, half the length of the game that you threw away, a game that is 5 hours long, but a game that is something that you remember for a long period of time afterwards, that is where the value is. If you shift your thinking of the value proposition of games to that, then bam, you are actually starting to look at games as an art form. And once you do that, then an entire different world on how you analyze games, how you talk about games is open to you. And that is where I think this industry really needs to go if it's going to develop as an art form. Anyhow, that is enough for this video and rant. Do let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear your own thoughts. And just to run through my usual end of video stuff, please do click that like and subscribe button if you enjoy my videos, because I do upload a lot of them and then you'll get to catch them as they go up. Also, if you want to back me on Patreon, you can do so. There's a link in the description box below this video. You can do so for just $1 a month. That support is instrumental in helping me to build this channel and what I'm doing with DDNet further. And on top of that, you get a magazine now. The magazine comes out this week, so you've got that to look forward to if you back me on Patreon right now. Other than that, I'll let you go. If you haven't played Resident Evil Village yet, do check out my review and get a copy. As long as you, if you like horror on any level, then this is one of the better ones we've seen in recent years. Thanks as always for watching. We will see you at the next video.